Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another election prediction. This time we have President Joe Biden up against former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley's more positioned to be a more moderate alternative to Joe Biden. She isn't as moderate as someone like Larry Hogan, though. So, again, she wouldn't really aggravate much of the more right-wing type of base here. I think she would really just do well with most voters and still get a lot of the Republican Party to go behind her. A lot of Trump voters would still vote for her, in my opinion. She's a lot more moderate on the issue of abortion, which honestly, that's probably very much a good thing that would actually help the GOP among independent voters who overwhelmingly agree with the Democrats on that issue. So I think Nikki Haley would have a lot of pros as a candidate. I still think she would get a lot of Trump supporters' support, which is extremely important. But let's get right into it. So the first few states. I'm going to start off with Alaska. I think she would probably make Alaska a safe Republican state. I think the type of Republican she is, I think she would unite most of the Republican base in Alaska and probably be able to keep her from going down to the likely column. In Iowa, again, I just think most GOP candidates would probably be able to win Iowa by over 10%, including her. I think she would still unite most of the Republican base here. She'd probably be able to win Iowa by about 10, pretty much the same amount as Trump would. In the state of Texas, I think she would actually do a lot better than Trump here. Again, she'd unite most of the party here. She isn't as toxic to urban voters or suburban voters as Trump is, and she would get better margins among independents. I mean, we look at the recent CNN poll, and it shows her being the best among independent voters out of all the Republicans here. So again, she would do quite well with suburban voters in Texas, and she would just do quite well in the suburbs all across America. But again, she'd pretty much lock in Texas as a not so much a swing state here, just a likely Republican. Ohio also, she would probably pretty much lock in. I really don't think she would underperform that much. I think people are kind of underestimating her here in Ohio. I still think she would get most of the Trump supporter base out in this state as well. I really don't see them objecting to voting for her because she really isn't quite too different from Trump in most of the policies anyway. And she would definitely be a lot more moderate here and be able to do better with independent voters. So, again, I think she'd pretty much lock in Ohio. In the state of Florida, I also think that her type of Republican here, which she would do quite well here. She would probably win by a pretty decent amount, probably like 7 or 8 points, pretty much the same amount as Trump. And the two states she'd massively approve on with Trump is North Carolina and Georgia. I really think she'd do better with independent voters here and do better in the suburbs. Again, she'd get rid of that anti-Trump Republican factor, and they would just instead vote for her. Those types of Republicans just like Trump on the issues, but just don't like him personally. She would do extremely well with those type of Republicans in both these states. I mean, considering she's beating Joe Biden in the popular vote by a pretty big amount, like the CNN poll said like 5 or 6 points, I don't think that'll actually happen in reality. I think maybe in the popular vote go to her by a point or two. But again, I think she'd do quite well in Georgia and North Carolina, just better margins than anti-Trump Republicans that really disliked Trump last time around. That also comes into play in Arizona. I think she would do quite well in this state as well with independent voters. Okay, New Mexico, it'd probably still be like a 8 point Biden victory. I don't see her making enough inroads to make it lean Democratic. But in Virginia, I really think Virginia is sort of a very anti-Trump state. Again, Nikki Haley kind of tends to be more on the establishment side here, and that would appeal quite well to Virginian voters. And I think she would actually get Virginia down to quite a competitive margin of 4 points. But Biden, as I said before, he'll still win by about 4 here in Virginia. In Nebraska second, I think she'd make this district quite a lot more competitive than usual, but again, the trends here are just very good for Democrats. I still think Biden would be able to win Nebraska second, but by a much more reduced margin of only 2%, she shifts it down by that much. In Nevada, due to her moderate stance on abortion, I really think that would help her in Nevada in a very pro-choice state, so I have Nevada narrowly going to her by a tilt Republican margin. In Maine, I think it would be a bit more competitive with her on the ticket. Again, Maine's kind of shifting heavy against Trump, but I think she'll be able to bring down Maine to a likely Democratic margin while winning Maine second by a likely Republican margin. Again, this district is a lot more of a moderate type of district. She'd be a good fit for Maine second overall. So we're down to the five states remaining here. One state I really don't think should be that competitive in is Minnesota. I still think it would go to Biden by about 4 points. She'd probably do a lot better than Trump here because, again, I think she would get more of those independent voters, which really matter in Minnesota. But in these last four here, I really think she should focus on Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Michigan, it's kind of a lost cause for her. I don't think she would get a lot of populist support in Michigan and the other Rust Belt states. She might actually lose some populist support in the rurals. But again, she would do better in the suburbs in all of three of these states right here. She would definitely massively improve on Trump's margins in the suburbs, which heavily turned against him. But Michigan, for now, I'm putting that as a lean Democratic in a Nikki Haley-Biden matchup. I really think Biden would be kind of favored there. We may as well mention New Hampshire as well. I think she would definitely make New Hampshire a lot more competitive than usual, but still a socially liberal state. I still think it would end up going towards Biden. And we're down to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So my case for Pennsylvania is, again, she would do a lot better in the suburbs, like I mentioned before. She might lose a bit of rural populist support as well. But again, those better margin in the suburbs would probably help her actually end up narrowly winning Pennsylvania. Just judging by that, she's beating Biden in the popular vote right now, according to that poll. Again, she's doing a lot better with independent voters in this state, which honestly very much matter in Pennsylvania. You really need to have that independent coalition behind you. But I really think she could get that to happen in Pennsylvania. She would definitely improve upon the suburbs, even though she would lose a little bit of support in the rural areas because she's not as populist as Trump. But I still think she would get a lot of the Trump supporters' votes still, while appealing to a bigger array of independent voters. So now we come down to the state of Wisconsin. She already won the election, but again, with Wisconsin, she would do a lot better in Waukesha County, which would definitely give her a lot more votes here. So I would have Wisconsin going as probably a tilt Republican state. So overall, I would have Nikki Haley winning the popular vote by about 2% in this scenario. I think she would do a lot better. And even some of the blue states here should get better margins in the suburbs in each of them. But really, what the election comes down to is Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. She really needs to at least win one of them. She could afford to lose Pennsylvania, could afford to lose Wisconsin. Just as long as she wins at least one of these two states, she could be the next president of the United States. So it's still very narrow. Again, she would lose a lot of rural support. So even though she wins a popular vote by 2, she only wins Pennsylvania and Wisconsin by under 1% tilt margins. But that's currently how I see the election going between Joe Biden and Nikki Haley if they were the candidates in 2024. And I would highly appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, and please leave a comment down below on how you feel about this video. Do you disagree with my calls? But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one.